My talk is called, Is It Possible to Prepare for the Future? If you are somebody who has to leave early or somebody who has trouble paying attention, let me give you the answer now. My answer is yes, and no, and yes. So if you want a more in-depth discussion, then please be with me for the next 45 minutes and let's talk about this idea. The talk that I do not want to give about AI is this one, which you have probably heard before. And you will probably hear again because it's a popular talk. I'm not going to be talking about AI tools and which ones you can use or the threats and the promises and whatnot. I want to talk more generally about what we as language teachers can be doing and should be doing for our future and the future of our students. So my focus, I am a language teacher. I am primarily these days a teacher trainer. So I'm a teacher trainer of teachers who are in the classroom. So my focus is not so much on research, and I don't do software development. I can't tell you the latest tips and tricks with tools or whatnot. I'm thinking about what do teachers do in class every day with their students, and what do teachers do in general with their own professional development and with their careers. So that's my focus. So when I talk with teachers around the world and online with teachers all over the world, I see two main reactions to questions about the future, especially where it concerns AI. There's the sort of panic. Oh my God, everything is changing. What do I do? What does this mean? It's all too hard. I can't. And related, but different, is the reaction of, oh, it's too much. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to deal with it. I just want to do what I've always done. And a feeling of sort of hopelessness and despair. So neither of those two reactions feel good. Neither panic nor despair feel good. So I want to bring you a message of more hope than either of those outlooks. So when I talk with teachers and when I listen to teachers, and I spend a lot of time in teacher online groups and just listening to teachers, what kind of questions come up naturally, what conversations come up naturally, I hear a lot of questions like these when they're thinking about AI. Should I, as a teacher, personally be using ChatGPT to construct my lessons or to create texts for myself? Do I have to do that? Am I now a bad teacher if I don't use AI because everybody else is using AI? What does AI mean for the materials that I already own and that I already use? Are all of my materials now useless? Are they all out of date? Do I have to get something different? If I find materials now, are they going to be out of date in 6 months or in a year? All of these new tips and tricks and tools and programs and whatnot, how do I use those in my classroom? Should I use them in my classroom? But if I should, how? Literally, how do I do that? How do I acquire these? Is that something my institution should pay for? If I'm a private teacher, should my students pay for it? Is that something I have to pay for by myself? Can I buy the software once, or is it an ongoing subscription? How do I handle currency and currency restrictions if I'm trying to buy something that's outside of my country, just the monetary issues? Of all the tools and programs out there, which ones are the best ones? How do I know that if I'm going to buy 2 things or 1 thing this year that I'm buying the right things? How do I know how to be teaching well? Do I have to pay somebody to train me? Do I need to go back to school? I already have a degree. I've been a successful teacher for years. Do I do I now need more expertise or training? And what if I can't do it? What if I don't feel I have the skills or the knowledge or the facility to handle some kind of new software? So those are the questions that I hear teachers asking out loud. People will admit to having those questions. But I feel underneath those questions, there are bigger questions that people don't like to say out loud. And those are questions like, is my job still meaningful? If there is Google Translate and DeepL and students can translate anything and ChatGPT can write an essay in 2 minutes that would take them 3 hours, why are they even in English class? Does anybody need an English class? If they don't need an English class, do they need an English teacher? If they don't need an English teacher, is my whole career pointless? Has my whole life been a joke? Do I have nowhere to go and nothing to offer? And those are scarier questions that have people questioning their entire career choice or their life path. And people are more hesitant to say these questions out loud, but I feel people asking them. And students, right, as they come through our classes and they meet us, have their own questions that are, the other side of the coin, but are related questions. If we tell them that they're not allowed to use AI and they can't use Google Translate or they can't use ChatGPT, they might be wondering, well, why not? If these tools exist, why can't I use them? I know teachers, I know some teachers who go through great lengths to make sure their students are not using any translation tools in the classroom, but then they turn around and use translation tools to write a letter to their administration, right? If they're, for example, English teachers in China or something. So if teachers are using these tools, why can't students use these tools? So those are, I think, some reasonable questions. But with those kind of perennial questions that even preceded AI, anytime we ask students to do something, they're wondering, why do I have to learn this language? In this language, why do I have to learn these things? Because what value does it have to me? Why should I, sitting in Moscow, why should I learn English? How will that help me? What does it have to do with real life? And students always come back to that question of, what can I use this for? How is it relevant to me? And those are not bad questions. And I think we as teachers need to have an answer to those questions. So those are the questions that people are asking out loud, but I don't know that they're exactly the right questions to ask. So the questions that teachers should be asking themselves, those real questions, are a bit more big picture, a bit more fundamental. You need to be asking yourself, what do people do with language? How do human beings use language now? Okay? And then from language, we move to English. What do my students that I'm teaching now, what do they do with English now? How does that intersect with their lives, if at all? And what will they need to do with English in the future? And if you can answer those questions, then you will always have something to teach your students. Once you know what they will do with language or what they do with language, then you can break it down into what skills do they need in order to do those things with language. And I'm going to give you some examples from my own life. And I'm going to ask that you also create those examples from your own life and eventually get students to answer those questions from their own life. So once you know what the skills that they need are, then the teaching question is, okay, if they need these skills in order to do these things, how do I teach and how do I practice those skills? But until you know what those skills are, until you know how people use language and what they use it for, how will you know what to teach?
Коллеги, школа Дмитрия Никитина приглашает вас на осеннюю школу Materials Development. Это двухдневный онлайн-курс, созданный для преподавателей и методистов, разрабатывающих собственные учебные материалы. Автор курса – Dorothy Zemach, редактор учебных курсов от издательств Pearson, Oxford University Press и Cambridge University Press. На курсе речь пойдет о модели создания ELT-продукта, пошаговой разработке собственных учебных материалов, использовании собственных материалов в учебном процессе и многом другом. Курс проводится на английском языке. Подробности можно узнать по QR-коду на экране или по ссылке в описании.
So I'm going to recommend that you do a needs analysis of contemporary students, preferably your students that you're teaching this year or next year or soon, and think, what are they going to do with language and what do they need to do with language? And to build that awareness, I'm going to recommend that you first do this with yourself and ask yourself, what do I do with language as a person, right? Not as a, ChatGPT or something. What do I do as a person with language? So I'm going to recommend that you personally keep a language diary. You can do it, on a laptop. You can do it with pencil and paper. You can even do it in your head, as long as you do it, where you ask yourself, what do I do with language? And every time you do something with language, be asking yourself, what am I doing? What is it for? How do I know how to do these things? So what did you use language for? What did you need to know in order to do that thing successfully with language? And how did you learn it? And of course, the other side of how did you learn it is how can you teach it to somebody else? And how did you learn it? How do you practice it? And how do you become more skillful at doing that thing with language? Because I don't care how much AI you encounter in your life, you are still using language as a human being every day, every hour of every day in order to communicate with people. The things we do with language changes, and the things we need language for changes, but the need we have to use language, that is constant, right? You do not go through your day now reading nothing, thinking nothing, speaking nothing, and writing nothing, right? That has not happened, and it will not happen. So since we all still need language and use language, you still have something valuable to give to other people. To the extent that you can, if you can get students to keep a language diary, that will be such valuable information for you. I have a little asterisk there where it says students, because I don't mean your current students. I don't think you look good as a teacher if you come to a current class of students who are giving you money now and ask them, well, what do you use language for? What do you need? They're expecting you to know, right? Your job is to find out what they need to know and to help them do that. But if you have students who were in your class 6 months ago or a year ago, or you know students who are similar to your students but are not your students, maybe you have children or nieces or nephews or neighbors or somebody, if you can get those people to give you information about how they use language for their jobs and their social lives and whatnot, that is such rich and valuable information. When I say be alert, I mean be thinking all the time about language and how it's used and how people get better at something. You probably already do this unconsciously, right? Even if you're at a party or a family dinner, or you're participating in a social media chat online, your awareness of how people communicate and turn taking and asking questions and asking for clarification, you're probably better at language and language functions than many of the people you know. So if you take that awareness that you already have of how people use language and how they can be better at it, and begin thinking about how can I take my knowledge of what people need and turn that into something that I teach. So here's an example. I'm going to give you two examples from my life. So this first example is actually of this talk. So the talk that I'm giving to you now, I first did for a conference in Brazil. And they gave me the topic about talking about AI in the future and whatnot. And I had to submit a title and an abstract. It's like, okay, so I planned out my whole talk and I wrote my abstract. And I wrote it first in a Word document. And then I had to go to their Google Doc and I just copied and I pasted it in. And I wrote what I felt was a good description of what I wanted to say and my point, et cetera, et cetera. I pasted it into the Google Doc and turns out that I was supposed to write an abstract that was 50 words long. And when I pasted my abstract into the Google Doc, it said that I was 133 words. Okay, so I need to get that down to 50 words. So I looked at what I had written about technology and AI and whatnot, and I thought, okay, well, we can cut it a bit and tighten it up. And I wrote a second draft, and I pasted that in. It's a bit shorter, it's leaner, it's punchier. It's like, good, 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 good. And it is shorter, not quite short enough. Now I'm to 92 words. And now I have to make it even shorter. If you have ever tried to write something short or to write an abstract, you know how hard that is. There is a wonderful quote from the American writer Mark Twain, who was writing a letter to a friend. And he said, "I apologize for having written such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one." Because actually, to write something shorter is harder, right? If you have a lot of words, you can throw everything out, but to write something really short is difficult. So I looked at what I had written and I thought about what I can change. And there's information in there that's not like essential, but also has, I want to say, a bit of my personality or my style. So if you look at that, at the second sentence. So first sentence, technology is changing so fast these days. There's my intro sentence. Second sentence, prepare for the future. It's hard enough just to prepare for the present. Those two sentences, not necessary, right? We can take them out and the meaning doesn't change. And yet those two sentences show you a bit about my personality and the style of the talk and whatnot. So do I keep them? Do I lose them? I chose to keep them. So this is the final thing that I pasted into that Google Doc and I hit submit, and that went off. Remember that my word limit is 50 words. So I sent it off with my 77 word limit. So after I did all this, I thought, what skills did I need in order to do this language task? I needed to know how to shorten and edit something, which means grammar, vocabulary, structure, syntax, organization, flow. So I certainly also have to think about what information is the key information, the essential information. It's an abstract for a conference is a bit of an advertisement. It's kind of a sell. This was for an online conference that had different talks at different times. So somebody could come to my talk, but they could go to somebody else's talk. So I need to advertise a bit. And I want to show them who I am and what the talk is going to be like, so that they won't be disappointed if they come because they were expecting something different. And I have to know what I can get away with. This is for Brazil. It's in a Google Doc that is not going to physically cut me off if I'm over that word count. For some countries or some nationalities or some conferences, if the word limit is 50, I might have kept working until I hit 50 or 49. For Brazil, I know that as long as I'm near 50, near enough to 50, it's probably going to be fine. So that's a sort of situational knowledge that does affect the work I do. At the same time that I was working all evening on this talk and my Google Doc and whatnot, I was also working with in other aspects of my work life. I'm a writer, but I'm also an editor. I work with English language materials, but I also work with fiction authors. And I was working on editing a fantasy novel for one of my authors. And I was editing book, I think 4. It's a series of, I don't know, four books, 5 books. And I had done books 2, 3, and 4, but I was not the editor on book 1. And so there I am editing book 4, and I realize I need to know what happened in book 1, not in terms of story. I need to know what happened in terms of things like characters and spelling and punctuation. So I sent a message to my author, that blue writing you see on the screen, that's me. And I contact my author through Facebook Messenger, because that's how we mostly communicate. We send drafts back and forth, sometimes by email, but most of our correspondence is actually on Messenger. So I ask him, do you have the very first Akiry? Akiry is the series of these fantasy novels. I need it as a Word doc so that I can search it, right? And so I'm explaining to him why I need that. There are things that turn up in the current one that are not in the style sheet. And you'll notice that that second paragraph and the third paragraph, I don't have a period at the end of my paragraphs, because that's a feature of online communication. We don't have sentence final punctuation unless we're trying to make something like a definitive point or something. So I explained to him that I need to know about the apostrophe. My author answers, here you go. So less formal English than you will see in a textbook. And he puts the document in. I say, thank you. And then he says, any thoughts on the story? It was hard as getting through it. And so I said, well, I'm not done yet, but so far so good. For some reason, stories authors hate the most are the ones that often turn out the best, if that's any consolation and whatnot. So I care about apostrophes and punctuation and styling. My author, of course, cares that somebody likes his story and that his story is okay. So he's asking for some kind of reassurance. I need to give him that reassurance without overpromising, because I haven't finished the book yet. I need the information before I can finish the job. So we have all these language things going on. So what I need to do in order to do that language job, first of all, I need all this technical information about language. In order to edit something, I need to know about grammar and spelling and punctuation and conventions and how to make the book sort of be correct. Specifically for his genre, for fantasy, I have to know about conventions and plot arcs and how long it can be, and to make sure that what he's giving to readers is what readers expect. I need to know how to do the technical sort of things I have to do about that job, how to give him a style sheet, how to keep a list of all the conventions that I come up with. And I have to know how to communicate with that author. And the way I communicate with him, right, without sentence final punctuation, the fact that we're in kind of social media messaging at all instead of formal letters, the fact that he can, use swear words when he talks to me, that he needs to be reassured emotionally, all of that is language knowledge, but I need to know that in order to do my job. I like him. I mean, we're friendly, but he's not my friend, right? This is my work. It's my job. He's going to give me money for doing this work. But all of that language knowledge I need to have in order to do that job. And ChatGPT cannot do those things. That takes a human, right? So that's what I mean by keeping a language diary. When you think of everything you do with language, whether it's in Russian or English or any language, if you think, what do I do with language that only I can do as a human being? That's what's valuable for you to understand, because that's what you can teach to other people. Who is this handsome man? You are probably asking yourselves. This handsome man is my son. And I have his photo here, not just to let you know that he is still single, but to remind me to tell you some stories about him and his work life. So he has now, thank goodness, gone through university. He's out there in the work world, and he works in digital media and advertising and marketing, and I'm not 100% sure what he does, but he's out there in that world. And I talk to him sometimes about his job and what he needs to know and how things go. And half of me is asking because he's my son and I care about his life. And half of me is asking because I'm curious about language and how he uses it and how that turns up in his job. And I think of two stories that I gleaned from him. One is he used to manage a team of Brazilian engineers who are working on some product. And knowing that they were all in Brazil, and he is sitting in New York, I asked him, "Oh, how is it communicating with Brazilians? Do you ever have any miscommunications?" And he said, "Oh, yeah. Sometimes, they say something and I misunderstand, or I say something and they misunderstand." And I said, yes. Well, I suppose their English isn't fluent." And he looked a little surprised and he said, no, it's nothing to do with their English. We have communication problems because they are engineers and I am not. And I said, oh, it's not a language problem. And he said, no. A Brazilian engineer and an American engineer speak a language that an American engineer and I don't speak. So there's a style of communication, there's a way of thinking that's unique to that profession. So he's not thinking about subject-verb agreement or whether or not they've used the conditional tense or did they choose the right preposition. None of that makes any difference. He's thinking about styles of communication. He said, for example, engineers don't do a lot of digressions. They don't do a lot of small talk. They want things very sort of focused and linear and straight. Whereas he comes from a more humanistic, you would begin by asking about, oh, how was your weekend? How was the weather? And some sort of small talk, which the engineers find confusing. And they're thinking, why is he saying these things? Where is he going with this? So it's a communication style that's in English, but it's being influenced by personality types and brain types and profession. And it's something that's larger than nationality and larger than native language. So his current boss is French, and one reason he likes his current job is because he really respects this boss. And so I asked him once, "Oh, so your boss Omar?" And I said, "How's his English?" He said, "Fine, is it good enough?" And I said, "Oh, does he have an accent?" "Oh, yeah. Obviously, you can tell that he's a native French speaker." I said, "Does he make any grammar mistakes?" Yeah, I guess. And my son seemed confused that I was even asking about those things because they're just not on his radar at all. He cared about what his boss knows about business, what his boss knows about training and mentoring lower level employees and helping him think. And he said, my son, is a very sort of focused, small picture. I want to know step A, step B, step C, whereas his boss was more a kind of a big picture. What's our end goal? What's our philosophy? And it was that way of thinking that he wanted to get from his boss. And accent, prepositions, verb tenses, spelling didn't enter into it at all. So I'm not trying to say that those things are unimportant, but if what our students need to succeed in life is how to communicate with different kinds of people and how to understand different ways of thinking, that's what we need to be helping them do. And as language teachers, we have those skills because we're already used to thinking that way and understanding different ways of communication. So I would say we do all, as language teachers, still have a future. We do have jobs. We have a place in the world. But some of the skills that we need to be understanding and teaching, some of those skills are changing. So if we think of new skills that we will need to be helping students with, one huge skill is fact checking. Now that there's so much AI out there generating content all the time and summarizing content all the time, I swear every week there's more AI inserting itself into my life. If I look at a Facebook chat, like a group now, somebody asks a question, there's AI saying, "Hey, let me summarize this for you." If I open a PDF file in Adobe Acrobat to just read the file that somebody sent me, there's a little AI, "Oh, let me summarize this for you." Is it summarizing correctly? Sometimes, but not always. So we need to be helping students evaluate the material, the language that's coming at them. One interesting exercise that you can try, and you should try, is to ask ChatGPT to write something about you. So I asked ChatGPT to write a bio of me. And I have a web presence online. I also have a fairly unusual name, so that there's probably only one Dorothy Zemach out there. So if I send ChatGPT out to scrape the internet, it should be scraping information. Here's what ChatGPT came up for me. Dorothy Zemach, an influential figure in the world of education and literature, has left an indelible mark on the realms of language teaching and writing. So that sounds a little overblown and unnatural, but okay. But look at that next sentence. Born on a crisp autumn day in 1970 in a small town in New England, Zemach's journey was destined to be one of words and ideas. So I don't know about destined. Words and ideas, yes. But crisp autumn day. So my birthday is April 11th. of 1963, and I was born in a reasonably large-sized city in California, which is the opposite end of the country from New England. So that second sentence sounds very true, but it's completely false. If we go on, Zemach's academic journey took her to prestigious institutions, okay, where she honed her linguistic skills, okay. She graduated with honors. I didn't, because my university didn't have that system. In English literature, didn't. I studied French literature from a leading university, small college, earning accolades for her insightful analysis of classic, nope, and contemporary works. So there's very little in there that is actually true. Grammatically, it's great. Syntactically, it's great. The vocabulary is fine. Everything is spelled correctly, but the information is wrong. It sounds right, but it is wrong. So when your students go out into the world, they're going to be hit with all this AI-generated content, a large percentage of which could be completely wrong. So they need to not only understand language, but they need to know what to question and how to question it. If you looked at this and I said, there are some mistakes in here, how would you know which things were wrong? And how would you know how to find out the truth? How can you tell what year I was really born, or where I was born, or what I studied in university? How do you know that those are the things that need to be fact-checked? So those are skills that we need to be giving students. And I don't see those kinds of exercises in current textbooks. There aren't textbooks that say, go out and find a text and analyze its truthfulness, and here is how you fact check it, and here is how you find supporting sources that will corroborate or deny this information. So we need fact checking. Knowing that a lot of the language coming at us is going to be generated by AI, we also need to know how to make sure that it's kind of correct and human sounding in tone. So that whole bio where it's talking about, you know, prestigious this and honed that, it's a little exaggerated. It's not incorrect in terms of grammar or syntax, but it's incorrect in terms of style. I would never submit a bio that sounded that exaggerated. Here's another ChatGPT exercise that I gave ChatGPT. I belong to a Facebook group of people who fly a lot, you know, airplanes, right? Not like birds. Everybody has a hobby. I like to travel, so I'm in this group of people who fly. And somebody asked for a joke about airplanes, and it's like, "Oh, share your airplane jokes." And I thought, I don't know any airplane jokes. So I asked ChatGPT to write me an airplane joke, and it wrote me this. So I said, write a joke about airplanes. ChatGPT says, why don't airplanes ever tell secrets? Because they always wing it. Which doesn't actually make sense. It's got the format of a joke, it has the structure of a joke, but it's not funny because it doesn't make sense. So I looked at that and I thought, what? But it gave me an idea. And I was able to take that idea and write my own joke that did make sense. And so I put into my group, why don't airplanes keep an agenda? Because they're always winging it. So the idea that you would have a punchline around winging it, meaning to do something without plans. Okay, so I can do a question, why don't airplanes keep plans? Because they're always winging it. That works. That's something, yeah, maybe it's a good joke, maybe it's a bad joke, but it's clearly written by a human. whereas that first one is clearly written by a not human. When I asked my son recently, what are some ways that you communicate now that are not things that you were taught in high school or university? And he said a big part of his current communication in his job is using reactions. So they all use Slack, which is a platform where, everybody in the workplace shares it and they can write messages, kind of like social media, but inside one company. And when somebody writes something, how people respond with symbols is hugely important. And he said a lot of people are using blobs. And I said, sorry, what? Using what? He said, blobs. And he sent me this. And he said, especially in his company, rainbow blob is very common, which is one of these, except it's in rainbow colors. And it's also doing that with its hands. And how you use those reactions becomes very important in your workplace, right? It's not something for high school students or a joke. It's a business culture. And if you don't fit into your business culture, I mean, nobody's going to fire you if you didn't put down a blob. But if you don't communicate in the same way that other people communicate, it can have implications for your job. And you wouldn't necessarily lose your job because of one emoji, but you could lose your job because of not being able to communicate appropriately with other people. So understanding not just what those symbols mean, but how to use them and when to use them is now a business workplace skill. And that is something I have never seen in an English language teaching textbook, except as sort of a side extra activity, kind of like a joke or something, but not as serious business communications. So I'm going to say that a new skill we have to help students with is using nonverbal written language. How is the symbol that you're putting down? How is that used? How is that important? Another new skill, writing either in your own language or in English so that your language can be translated accurately. I remember an interesting discussion that I saw in a Facebook group where people were talking about, DeepL and Google Translate and whatnot. And there was a teacher in there who teaches translation studies. So somebody asked her, how do you stop students from using AI? How do you stop them from using Google Translate? And she said, stop them? I require them to. That's step one. They have to know how translation software works so that they can write in their own language. And she teaches in Japan, so they can write in Japanese in such a way that the Japanese will be translated correctly into English. Or conversely, as a next step, to write in English in such a way that an automated translation, that an AI translation back into Japanese will be accurate. That's hugely important. If you're somebody who's writing your company's webpage, if you need to write your company's webpage in Russian so that Google Translate, if I click the little English thing up in the corner so that your Russian will turn into an English that I can understand, that's a skill, right? It's not a skill that anyone needed 10 years ago, but it's a skill that people need now. I don't want to say that thinking is a new skill. That's why I've put it in parentheses. But I do think that thinking is a hugely important part of what we as language teachers need to be teaching students. I honestly don't know what the state of this organization is like in Russia, but I will just ask, have you heard of the Flat Earth Society? So it is a group of people, an organization. They have, a membership and a president and newsletters and everything of people who believe that the earth is flat, right? That the earth is not a globe, that the earth is flat. In the last 10, 20 years, membership in this society has been growing, not falling, especially in England. Cannot explain that to you, but membership in that society is growing. So I'm going to give you a newspaper article that I will let you just read to yourself for a moment. So this is from an online news article aimed at adults, right? English speaking American adults. And you see in that final line, they have to write, to be absolutely clear, the earth is not flat, as NASA explains in a fact sheet aimed at 5th to 8th graders, because an elementary school student should understand that the earth is not flat. But look at where this is coming from. An underlying need for power and control. People want to feel that they know something, and what they know is simple and clear. Power comes from knowledge, even if that knowledge is false. So that person Weiss, that's a flat earther. When you find out the earth is flat, then you become empowered. You don't. I mean, the earth is not flat. So you do not become empowered by believing something that isn't true, but it's simple, right? A simple answer and a safe answer feels emotionally better. If I say to you that the Earth's climate is changing, and when it changes, there will be a lot of terrible consequences and people could die, that's a scary concept. And there are people who want to reject that and say, no, that's not true. The weather is fine. Everything is fine, right? There isn't a war over here. There isn't a problem over here. The earth is flat. I don't understand a round earth. I can't understand a flat earth. So in the last decade, half decade, 5 years, 10 years, there's been a reaction, certainly in my country and in Western Europe, and you can ask yourself about your own country, of people who are looking for simple, safe answers because they're afraid of something more complex. How do we respond emotionally to something upsetting or to something difficult? And that's a psychology question, but it's also a language question and something that we can help students to do in a language classroom. And it's maybe time to step away from exercises where there's only one right answer and do more discussion where you have different viewpoints and there isn't a right answer, but we've at least examined the issue, and to get people more used to and comfortable handling complex and potentially upsetting information. So what can we do in our classroom with these ideas? And I have a few suggestions for you. First of all, if you're at all concerned about keeping up with the latest bit of technology and should we be using Cahoots or should we be using this? And some of my students' phones doesn't work that. Instead of trying to always learn the latest piece of software, turn it around and let your students do that. If you tell them what it is you want them to do, for example, learn and memorize and practice some vocabulary, and you set that as an assignment, and you tell your students, could you go home, think about it, come back to class with some ways to practice vocabulary? And it does not matter what they come back with. It could be pencil and paper flashcards. It could be a cool new app that came out 3 days ago that you've never heard of. Whatever it is that your students find will be something that other students in your class can use now. And you don't have to panic about not having kept up with the latest apps in the last week. because your students will already know what it is that's accessible to them. You need to focus on what it is you want them to learn. I would also have your students start thinking about what language is used for. This is a little different from a language diary where you're looking specifically at your own language, but have them think about skills and what do people do, right? Not so much what grammar do they use or what vocabulary do they use, but when they imagine going out into the world of work, or if they're already in the world of work, how do people communicate? Are they communicating mostly written? Are they communicating mostly with messaging apps? Are they writing letters? Are they on the phone? Are they meeting in person? How is language being used? And just get them aware of that. And then what are they using a second language for? When would they use English? Why would they ever use English or a second language or a third language? At the same time, I would highly suggest, as I said before, that you keep a language diary for yourself. What do you do in English? What do you do in Russian? Or what do you do in any other language? If you can find examples of real workplace language and bring that in and let students work with it, whether they're writing answers or using emojis or responding to it, but let them see how language is used in the real world, because that answers that question, what does this have to do with real life? Show them real life and show them how language is used in real life. So when the activity that I've mentioned here is if you have an exchange or something, ask students what emoji they would put down. Let them choose their own and then compare and ask, oh, when you put a thumbs up, I thought that was kind of a passive aggressive disagreement. And someone else will say, well, no, I meant that as an agreement. And discuss what is the common convention. What does that symbol really mean now? You can certainly have your students do those kinds of exercises of fact checking where you have AI create something, you bring it in and ask students, what about this is true? What about it is not true? How do you know? And how did you discover that? And students love to do that sort of fact checking of something else. You can do translation exercises as well. Let them write a paragraph in Russian, then write the same paragraph in English themselves, then ask AI to translate it and compare the AI translation to the translation they did. What's the same? What's different? Which one is better? Sometimes the AI is going to be better. Sometimes the AI is not going to be better. If you've ever struggled with students who are reaching for AI to do their homework, it can be eye-opening for them to realize that AI sometimes does a worse job than they would do themselves. So they think they're turning in something better, but actually when they've reached for an AI tool, they're turning in something worse. So that's a good exercise to go through. You can also have them go the other way. If write something in English, have it translated by Google Translate or DeepL or something back into Russian. Was it accurate? Was it not accurate? What did it misunderstand? How could you change the English so that the Russian would come out correct, right? So that's a different kind of facility with English than we see in current textbooks, but an important one. You could have them in groups, write a paragraph about a certain topic in Russian, then have AI translate it, and then compare the translation in different groups. Whose original Russian got the best translation into English? So how can you work with your native language such that AI is going to do a good job of turning it into another language? I know when I go to a website online for, if there's a country or a language I don't speak, if I need to read something in Portuguese, I'm not going to go and study Portuguese for 3 years. I'm going to hit that little button at the top that translates it into English. And wouldn't it be nice if the English that came out to me was more or less correct? If you keep coming back to that same question that your students ask about why do I need to learn this? Why is it important? How will it help me? That will help so much with their motivation and their focus, because they'll know that they're working on something that is really important. Language is so hugely important. I cannot go through a day without using language with so many different people in so many different ways. There's no way that AI can take away language from us. You just need to help your students become aware of how that's used. I don't know if you know the saying in English, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. It means when you're getting rid of a problem, make sure you don't get rid of something good at the same time. So that's why I say, when you look at how language is used and communicative purpose and communicative competence and whatnot, that doesn't mean don't teach accuracy and don't teach grammar and don't, give tests and grade students on getting the linguistic structures right. Just at the same time, be aware of a higher purpose and let them know that the point of being accurate and correct in language is to increase their chances of making their message clear and understandable to other people. So I'm not at all saying take your textbooks and throw them away. They're useless now because we're all just trying to communicate. But take the materials that you have and think about how language is used now and add in some extra skills that I think are probably not there. So this is the end of ChatGPT's bio of me, which I got. ChatGPT at this point has assumed that I've already died, which I have not. But here's how it's imagining me, I guess, a few years after I've passed on. As the years unfolded, Zemach's impact on the world of language education and literature, suddenly I'm doing literature, continued to grow. Her legacy became a testament to the idea that words have the power to connect, inspire, and transform lives. So ChatGPT got a lot of things about me wrong, but that last one is correct. I do believe that words and sentences and language and communication have the power to connect, inspire, and transform lives. And if you understand that and you feel passionate about that, you still have a hugely important role to play in the education of your students and in life. So go you. Thank you so much for coming, for listening, for giving me your attention. If you want copies of these slides, you can get them from the conference. If you want to find me online, that's my website, which has a contact form. I am on Facebook. I'm kind of on LinkedIn. I'm kind of on Instagram, but I don't know that I've really posted anything in 2 years. So that's, you could send me a message there, but I might not see it. Where I am is Facebook and on my website, and I would love to hear from people and to continue talking about language and ideas. And thank you so much.